My name is Lena Brooks. I'm 32. I'm sitting in my living room that has become a command center, 2 folding tables, 4 monitors stacked like little windows, a cooling cup of jasmine tea, and a floor that vibrates from the neighbor's washer. It's Friday, 8:59 a.m., and my 72-hour countdown just expired. This is our weekly peak hour, the moment when the world refreshes its feeds and everyone who checks in will see the same thing at the same time. My former chief executive is across town in a glass conference room rehearsing a win that isn't his. My former finance head told people I was handled. The incoming fixer is poking at a code folder he doesn't understand, trying to stop what I've already locked in. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., the feeds flip 11. 2 million people watch their timelines turn into the truth. I sit very still and watch it bloom. Before I tell you everything that led to this and how I made my company regret firing me, tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment. Also, hit subscribe and switch on notifications if you like stories where someone takes a clean, careful stand and makes daylight do the work. I write software like I stack bricks, slow, level, every piece doing its job. People called me Chief Technology Officer, but that title never captured the way I thought about the product. My daily habit was simple. Make the system safe, fast, and fair. I kept odd hours, pulling all-nighters to fix a bug at 2 a.m., taking walks at 5 a.m. to clear my head, showing up for noon stand-ups with real solutions, not slogans, because our users never slept and neither did my mind. I like to be invisible in public and exacting in private. I'd rather the product shined than a person's photo in a newsletter. My desk at the office was boring by design. Sticky notes in plain language, a small ceramic cup where I dropped screws and thumbtacks I found on the floor, and a single strip of tape on my monitor that read, "Trust is a feature." I handled crises by shrinking them to the next honest step. When something broke, I didn't dramatize it. I mapped out a fix, assigned it, and stayed until it was done. My paycheck was generous, sure, but what I truly owned was knowledge, how our matching engine paired people with the posts that mattered to them. I knew which lines of code made the feed feel like magic and which choices nudged people into loops they couldn't get out of. My central lack wasn't talent or grit, it was protection. I built something that people trusted and that was valuable, and I waited too long to lock the doors properly. I told myself I'd walk away if things turned dark. I was wrong about the timing. We weren't the biggest social app, but we were the one that didn't crash during spikes. People noticed. The matching engine, the thing tech writers called the secret sauce, wasn't glamour. It was disciplined math with rules that protected people from being gamed. I wrote guardrails into the system, no secret boosts for advertisers, no quiet changes to privacy settings after midnight, and no tricks that hid how decisions were made. Every time someone suggested temporary shortcuts, I'd write temporary equals forever on the whiteboard and circle it. I required a plain log for every sensitive action, who switched to privacy control, who exported user lists, who changed a ranking rule, and a clear English reason next to it. The consent screens we offered were readable at a glance, not buried in legal nonsense. That cost us growth early, but it bought trust. The system had one quiet sentinel, an internal watcher I called Sentinel 7. It didn't look for bugs, it watched for people doing the wrong thing. It flagged patterns that matched old scandals at other companies, secret data routes, tests that looked like harassment, and edits to the parts of the site that decide what people see. I insisted we design for humans, not metrics. Every time someone wanted a fast win, I imagined the long tail, a person hurt, a private post exposed, a life disrupted. That thought kept me from cutting corners. We trained our engineers to treat the platform as a promise, not a toy. When we failed users, it was my job to see the damage and fix the leak fast. I never expected that the leak might start from inside the house. My best ally at the company was my lead developer, Maggie Ruiz, steady hands, clean code, no patience for office theater. 14 core engineers made up the spine of what we built. Backend folks who kept the data moving, security people who watched for intruders, site reliability engineers who managed traffic, and a small trust and safety group who'd seen how harassment moves fast, loud, and then sideways. We had a dead simple group chat rule: no false urgency, no blaming, and no late-night drama unless the site was actually on fire. Our quality assurance lead was a detail hound who could spot a broken layout from a single pixel shift. She caught things other people missed. The operations lead could reroute traffic between data centers with a coffee in one hand. We hired slowly, trained carefully, and offered to pay for therapy after a bad incident because trauma at work shouldn't be part of the job description. Trust and safety included 2 former moderators who knew how organized harassment looked on the inside. DevOps knew the difference between a real outage and someone pressing buttons to make things look worse. Product managers who stuck around did it because they believed a platform could be built on respect. We kept a small, honest culture. When someone made a mistake, we fixed it and learned from it. The weak link wasn't them. The weak link was how power felt to the people at the top, how they preferred narrative over records, appearance over audits. I trusted the team because they trusted users. They believed in a simple rule: protect the people who use us, not the numbers that made us look good. That belief kept us honest until it met other people's hunger for faster growth. Then there were the softer things that cut deeper because they acted like accidents. PR wanted to handle technical interviews centrally, which meant no one from engineering could talk to the press without sign-off. That translated to keeping the public story tidy and off my voice. The finance head began phrasing requests as performance concessions, a polite wrapper for pausing privacy features that didn't make money. The chief executive's voice shifted from we to I in emails and meetings, a change so small it felt like a nick, but it bled. Offers to new hires included control over infrastructure clauses that never mentioned me. Equity updates came with charts that always made my ownership a fraction smaller. Market conditions, they said, and their tone suggested it was the sort of weather I couldn't complain about. These were the small betrayals that add up. People close to power start thinking the rules bend for them. When you're building a platform you trust, you assume others share that trust. I assumed too much. I told myself to pick my fights. I told myself I could bend without breaking the promise we'd made to users. I chose the wrong ones. So I started a quiet plan. I called it Sentinel-7 because I like names that sound calm in a panic. It was simple in idea: watch for people doing things that would hurt users, not bugs, not performance blips, those happen. I meant human choices that turned private things public, that sold data quietly, that tested people without their consent, that made an engineer's evening experiment into someone's personal nightmare. Sentinel-7 logged 3 things the way a careful friend keeps receipts: who accessed user data, who changed privacy settings, and who edited the parts of the product that decide what people see. I built it to be small and hard to notice. It kept plain English records, not jargon that a lawyer could hide behind. If someone copied a list of user emails out, the Sentinel wrote down the time, the file name, and a short, clear reason if one was given. If a privacy setting flipped open for an experiment, it recorded the window of exposure and how many accounts were affected. It watched patterns, many tiny accesses that add up, or a few big moves routed through roundabout channels. I set rules to flag behavior that matched the worst things I'd seen in other companies. I didn't tell anyone except Maggie. She's the kind of person who understands why a safety net is worth the trouble. I thought maybe it'd never be needed. I was wrong. I didn't build it because I wanted revenge. I built it because I couldn't stomach the idea of something we promised being taken without a trace. It was insurance, a quiet, ugly word, and I liked the idea of being prepared. One morning I woke to my calendar scrubbed clean. Meetings I had set as recurring were gone, replaced by blank spaces. My key code folders were suddenly locked to read-only, and the change notes read maintenance. An unfamiliar assistant sent a message asking me to bring my laptop and badge to a mandatory all-leadership session. The invite dropped with 3 minutes' notice. My access token, my little key to the building, stopped working in the lobby turnstile as if someone had flipped a switch. 3 engineers pinged me from their personal phones. Their access around anything with my name on it had tightened. A frantic message from the DevOps lead said they'd seen flags on my account, the kind of flag that usually means a separation is being prepared. I sat on the edge of my couch and felt the temperature of the room change. It was a cold that lived below my skin, not a hot fury. I was terrified, but not for myself first. I thought of the people who trusted the product and how a lockout could become an excuse for a cleanup. The mandatory session turned out to be a small, windowless room in the building I used to walk into every morning. There was a human resources rep, a folder with printed terms, and the sentence that lands like a hand on your shoulder. This is best for everyone. The stack contained a soft severance and a clause to keep us quiet about internal tools. I could have argued. I didn't. I read every line, signed, and asked for a copy. They took my badge and my laptop. I asked for 5 minutes at my desk. I took a ceramic cup of found screws, a stack of sticky notes with blunt reminders, and the strip on my monitor that read "Trust is a feature." I walked out into the wet morning air, the smell of damp concrete and bus exhaust filling my lungs. I didn't look back. I texted Maggie, "Clock starts now, 72 hours. The text felt small and enormous at the same time. My phone buzzed with 3 names asking where to send what they'd saved. Back in my apartment, I set the timer. I had made the Sentinels trigger a simple schedule only I could change. I armed the 72-hour countdown and watched it tick down in the corner of the screen while my jasmine tea cooled beside the keyboard. I built a lightweight staging site to mirror a reveal. It was lean and fast and spread across places they wouldn't think to touch. Maggie pushed a clean build of the visuals, plain charts, clear labels into my hands. The group chat changed its name to a single emoji. It was a private joke and a code. I turned off all notifications that weren't mission critical. If it didn't help the reveal, it was noise. My tea went cold. I wrote the voiceover script in language a teenager could understand, then read it aloud until it sounded right in my mouth. I wrote one promise at the top of my notebook: revenge won't be destruction. It will be daylight. I synced a final backup, told the team the plan, and reminded them of the rule: nothing in the reveal that we can't explain simply. Then I pressed a soft button that only I could press and watched the countdown become a presence in the room. Sentinel-7 started to hum in the background like a living thing. Its dashboard lit up with anomalies, tiny beacons that meant human hands were pulling levers. It recorded a string of data exports routed through unfamiliar accounts, numbers that looked like payment amounts written beside odd file names. The logs showed privacy settings switched open for 2,000 test accounts and then quietly closed. On their face, those changes could be called experiments, but the patterns looked like a hand did the work to avoid leaving fingerprints. The Sentinel captured emails that said what people didn't say aloud in meetings. Phrases like off-book and narrative management appeared in plain text. Spreadsheets had columns with numbers that matched bank transfers when you did the math. The amounts were too neat to be honest. They were written like someone who wanted the books to balance without being found out. I copied everything to a private drive and triple-checked timestamps. The story they told was simple and terrifying: money out, data out, signatures unclear. Worst of all, the timing of an internal experiment lined up with the harassment that hit my sister's group. The Sentinel showed accounts switched to open, scraped posts and interactions that targeted a small circle. It wasn't a coincidence. I stopped pretending this might be a misunderstanding. It was a plan that used our product to test how people could be pushed into harm and then hide the tracks behind a label that said growth. I felt a steady, cold resolve settle over me. The quiet plan I'd hoped would never wake had found a reason to open its eyes. When I pulled her feed logs, the pattern was ugly and clear. Someone had opened a door, scraped the posts, and fed them back to fake accounts programmed to reply in a way that would sting. The replies were surgical, little nudges, old wounds resurfaced in phrases Paige had long avoided. The timing matched the internal experiment window the Sentinel had flagged. 2,000 accounts flipped to open for a few hours, then shut. It wasn't random. They'd drawn a map and walked on it. She was in my apartment within the hour, hair in a messy bun, a hoodie she'd shoved on without care. She sat on my couch and cried for a long time. That wasn't dramatic, just the steady letting go of fear and shock. She kept saying, "Did your platform do this to me?" like she was asking if the sky had fallen. I showed her the logs, but I blurred names and highlighted timestamps so the facts were simple. Numbers and times, nothing in lawyer language, just the way you'd explain a path on a map. This happened, then that happened, then this. She pressed her thumb to the screen of her phone the way people do when they try to hold themselves in one piece. "Make it stop," she whispered. I felt the sentence land heavier than any boardroom insult. It turned my anger from a professional knot into a personal blade. I promised her two things. I would not let this be swept under a rug, and I would not let her be used as proof that people don't matter. She agreed to let me include a redacted version of her story in what I was planning, with changes to protect the group and her friends. She read the script, mouthed words, and asked for nothing that would make her story a spectacle. She wanted to be safe, not famous. We ate takeout on paper plates and put a blanket over the couch. Paige slept with the light on in the living room while I kept the screens bright and my fingers moving. Every time she stirred, I checked the logs again. My resolve hardened into a plan with a face. If they used our product to hurt someone I knew, I would pull the curtains open and let everyone see the wiring. The fight had left the office and come home with my sister on the couch. The room where they handed me the separation papers felt smaller than it should have. HR had a bright lamp and a plant in the corner, like they were trying to make it look humane. Someone had scheduled the meeting for mid-morning, the kind of time when people's guards are lower and attention floats. They put a folder on the table with polite language and a sentence that was meant to sound soft. "This is best for everyone." I read the pages the way you read a book when you already know the ending. There was a severance number, a clause about not discussing internal tools, and a promise to help with references. They offered to walk me out. I signed. People later asked why I signed so fast. In that moment, the signature felt like a tool, like a lever I could use outside their rooms. Fighting there would have let them investigate and sanitize the records. Walking would make them sloppy. Signing made the separation official, which in turn triggered audit events the Sentinel was watching. That was not coincidence. It was a detail I needed. They took my badge and my laptop. The laptop felt colder than I expected when they slid it across the desk. I asked for 5 minutes at my old desk. Those 5 minutes were sacred. I collected a ceramic cup of screws I'd found on the floor, a stack of sticky notes with blunt reminders, and the strip of tape from my monitor that read, "Trust is a feature." I tucked the tape into my notebook like a talisman. Outside, the San Francisco morning was damp and washed in gray. I walked down the steps and didn't look back. I texted Maggie at the first crosswalk. "Clock starts now, 72 hours. Her reply came fast. An emoji and a single word, "ready." My phone buzzed again with names and files being offered from safe accounts. The swarm started. Back home, I set the countdown. I had built the Sentinel with a simple plan for emergencies, and I had a trigger that only I could flip. It was a schedule nested in a safe place, a button that didn't destroy anything but made evidence speak in the open. I armed the 72-hour timer and watched the numbers settle into the corner of the screen like a heartbeat. The jasmine tea I'd made in the morning sat cooling in a white mug, steam barely rising now. I wrapped my hands around it to warm my fingers and read through the script for the voiceover one more time. Maggie pushed a clean build of the visuals to a secure staging site she'd set up on servers outside the company's usual paths. The film had to be simple, honest, and fast-loading. She sent me a version with plain charts, short captions, and timestamps. We had decided on subtitles and a one-page index for those who wanted to click through receipts. The group chat's name was a single emoji, a small, private code, and it pinged with short updates. Audit clip in, email thread attached, page OK with redaction. I turned off all notifications that weren't on the mission list. Everything else was noise. I wrote the voiceover in language that didn't hide behind fancy words. If a teenager could read it and understand, so could the rest of the world. I read lines out loud until they felt honest when spoken, not rehearsed. I practiced the cadence of the opening sentence in front of the monitors, listening for any hint of anger that might sound like a vendetta. I wanted calm. I wanted clarity. I wanted daylight, not fireworks. I synced a final backup, all the files spread across 3 mirrors, and tucked a flash drive into the inner sole of my shoe like something out of an old spy movie. It made me grin despite the gravity. My tea went cold on the coaster while I made an index sheet titled Explain Like I'm 15, a plain list of every receipt and a one-line note about why it mattered. Then I typed a single note at the top of my notebook: revenge isn't destruction, it's daylight. I clicked the final arm button with my thumb and felt a small, decisive click in my chest. I tried the quiet channels first. I wrote a calm note to the board address: I have records of internal abuse. I will cooperate. Please preserve evidence. I used the word cooperate because I wanted to sound reasonable and because I was. The reply came from an assistant, not a director. We'll review. Do not access internal systems. That was the polite stall. I asked for a call with the head of legal. They gave me a 2-week calendar block, stalling 101. I sent a redacted sample to show I wasn't bluffing, and then the thread went quiet like a phone with a dead battery. I called investor relations and it rolled over to voicemail. Each polite obstacle was a door closing on the inside, and every closed door meant the polite road was a cul-de-sac. I could keep being polite and watch them clean the traces, or I could show the traces where people could see them. I told the team we'd test the honest way first, but the polite path had already chosen to ignore us, so we pivoted. I updated the reveal script to include definitions for the words that make people glaze over. Shell company became a company that exists to move money without showing whose it is. Data export became a list someone pulled out of the system. I stripped jargon until the language sounded like the person next to you at the bus stop explaining what happened. Maggie offered a set of visuals that matched the plain text, and the QA lead added hashes to show files hadn't been altered after timestamps. The plan was simple: make the story easy to understand and hard for them to spin away from. The polite doors were closing, the room was getting smaller, the rest was daylight and proof. The rehearsal recording was sticky with small cruelties. He practiced lines about visionary leadership, and someone off camera laughed at the part where they called out legacy leadership in a way that meant me. The incoming fixer, new chief technology, nodded along like he'd learned the script in a week. They'd rehearsed questions and responses, and one line hit me in the chest. We wish her well. It was meant to sound polite, like a bow at the end of a play. To them it was closure, to me it felt like erasure. There was PR talk layered over the rehearsal, phrases designed to make the board and investors feel safe. The finance head used metaphors about platform parenting, and I laughed aloud in an empty apartment because the idea of them as parents was absurd. Parents protect. These people were trading custody of people's data and pretending it was a growth exercise. Someone else practiced how to call me erratic in a way that sounded like concern. They'd written the play where I was the problem and they were the saviors. It was staged so carefully that anyone who wasn't there would believe it. When I watched the video, I didn't feel anger, more a steady, cold clarity. They were building a narrative so tidy it would let them redraw history. They'd already started telling the story that I couldn't lead at scale, that I resisted change, that our troubles were because of legacy code and not because someone had quietly opened doors. The recording became evidence in my hands. I annotated timestamps and saved the clip to the reveal folder. The rehearsal didn't just erase me from the team pictures, it gave me the reason to put the truth where the world could see it. People asked later why I signed the papers so quickly. The answer is practical and stripped of drama. I didn't want to fight inside the room where they could whitewash the records. If I argued there, they'd have time to investigate themselves and clean up the receipts. Walking away made them sloppy. Signing made the separation official, which then triggered certain audit events the Sentinel had been watching. It was a small, ugly arithmetic. Staying would give them time, leaving would give me daylight. I read the stack of papers with the same calm I used when reading code. There was a severance number, language about confidentiality, and a clause that tried to clip the wings of anyone who wanted to speak about internal tools. The papers were polite, soft around the edges like a bandage over a wound. I could have ripped them up and stormed the room, but that would have played into their script. I wanted their script to be the one people saw because I had evidence that would make their script look like a forgery. Signing meant I lost a badge and a desk, not leverage. I handed over the laptop they wanted and kept 3 small things: a ceramic cup of screws I'd collected, a stack of sticky notes with blunt reminders, and the strip of tape on my monitor that read "Trust is a feature." Those items felt foolishly precious, but they were anchors. I walked out into the foggy morning and didn't look back. At the first crosswalk, I texted Maggie, "Clock starts now, 72 hours. Her reply was instant, "Ready." The quickness of her answer steadied me. Leaving on my own terms made their future moves visible in a way fighting in a room full of lawyers never would. It was a strategy, not surrender. 14 core engineers chose a different path. They refused retention bonuses offered as quiet buyouts, and they kept our dead simple group chat alive on personal devices. The simplicity of that chat mattered. No drama, no false urgency, just a steady trickle of facts and offers to help. The QA lead sent me screen recordings with a little hash stamp in the corner to prove they hadn't been doctored. The trust and safety duo pulled thread maps showing how the 2,000 fake accounts had operated, timing, content, and the small patterns that scream organized harassment. DevOps sent server logs that traced changes the fixer made and the rollbacks that followed, showing a trail not of careful fixes but of clumsy pokes. People on that team risked careers and comfort by keeping contact. The product manager forwarded emails where someone in finance suggested massaging retention numbers, an ugly way to make the platform look healthier than it was. A sympathetic office manager slipped me a photo of a takeover party invite draft, calling it a fresh era, dated before my separation. Each piece felt like a hand extended across a burning room. They didn't want glory. They wanted truth. We made rules out of necessity. Nothing that went into the reveal could be incomprehensible to a normal person. No leaks that would put individuals in danger. No edits that would let critics say we'd faked anything. People sent files from home accounts, zipped and double-checked. A few folks asked to be anonymous in anything public, and I agreed without argument. They wanted the product to be saved and the platform to be better, not to be the stage for personal revenge. Their courage was quiet. Late-night uploads, whispered confirmations, a willingness to sleep less and check logs while the world went about its day. They became the spine of the plan, humble, precise, and careful with each other. We rewrote the plan overnight because the polite path had already shown its face: silence and stall. My original idea was a plain written report. It would have been neat and academic, but reports get buried in legal channels and dry out under corporate language. I wanted movement, something people noticed the moment it appeared, so I switched to a short film, simple, human, and hard to dismiss. I structured it in 3 parts: what happened, who did it, and what we could do about it. The film needed to reach people who skim and people who read every note, so we combined footage, plain charts, and voiceover in language anyone could understand. We worked through the night. I wrote the script in short sentences, reading each line aloud until it sounded like something I'd say to my sister. Maggie edited visuals down to their cleanest form, no flashy transitions, just facts with faces blurred where needed. The QA lead insisted every file have a visible checksum so anyone could verify it hadn't been altered after the timestamp. We blurred names and handles in my sister's part to protect the small group she belonged to, and she read the script and made edits until it felt right. The goal was not to dramatize pain but to show patterns: files pulled, privacy switches opened, money moved. Each slide had one sentence explaining why it mattered. We cut any jargon that would put readers to sleep. Shell company became a company set up to move money without showing who owns it. Data export became a list taken out of our system. I wrote an index, explain like I'm 15, and stuck it at the start. We added captions in multiple languages because the platform reaches people who don't all speak the same words. By dawn, we had a file called Daylight 1, MP4, exported and mirrored across servers that weren't connected to the company's usual paths. The staging site was lean and fast-loading, designed to withstand a panic. We practiced a private dry run with 100 volunteers in a hidden room and listened to their reactions. Clear, human, devastating, they said. That feedback cut what felt like unnecessary edges. We also set strict rules: nothing that exposed lower-level folks, no edits that would let the company say we doctored evidence, and a promise to use the reveal to push for fixes, not to burn the place down. The plan wasn't about vengeance anymore in my mind, it was about daylight and repair. By the time the sun came up, I felt ready in a way that wasn't a rush of adrenaline but a settled, determined calm. The room smelled of cold coffee and takeout, the monitors glowed, and the team, small, exhausted, fierce, waited with me. He began by renaming parts and moving files to new directories, the kind of superficial tidy-up that makes a record harder to read. I watched his changes in the logs. Maggie fed me small, clumsy edits that didn't account for load or context. Error rates started to tick up. Pages that used to load instantly now had small pauses. It's the kind of thing users notice as a hair out of place, a feed stutter, a lag in reactions. The Sentinel lit up like a Christmas tree each time he pushed something. It wasn't intentional vandalism, it was ignorance with swagger. He killed a debug tool I used to watch how data flowed. That tool wasn't showy, it was a probe that let me see when something odd went out the back door. When it went offline, a Sentinel rule triggered and the timer jumped ahead by 4 hours. I felt the shift as a physical shove in my gut. Maggie texted in all caps. He took the probe down. Timer moved. Now, the DevOps lead spent an overnight hunched over consoles trying to patch what Trent broke, and the site reliability team babysat his experiments. Users saw the stutters and took screenshots. The optics shifted from fresh era to sloppy hands at the wheel. Trent didn't mean harm, not in the way a deliberate saboteur does. He meant to look decisive and fast. He thought renaming files and moving folders is how you show change. But code isn't like furniture. You can't swipe the cushions and call it a new living room if the wiring is different. Each of his little changes made the platform more brittle and fed the narrative I'd been afraid of, that instability could be blamed on me. The more he poked, the faster the timer counted down. PR started circulating a story about transition pains. The chief executive fed them the line: a fresh leader, some early hiccups, all normal. It felt like a cheap play. Trent, with his neat notebooks and confident answers, became the easy face to point at, while the real mechanism of damage kept humming behind closed doors. I kept my voice low on incident calls, focused on reverting to the last known good build and isolating the pieces he'd surprised. The team did the steady, ugly work of cleaning up someone who didn't understand what they were touching. Trent's arrival accelerated everything. His clumsy hands made the timeline shorter and the reasons to reveal everything more urgent. They were already preparing a story about me. In rehearsed clips and leaked notes, they painted me as brilliant but erratic, a phrase so tired it could have been written by a middle school drama teacher. PR dressed it up as concern. We admire her contributions, but leading at scale requires steadiness. Translation: we're rewriting the history so the winners look tidy. It was a line they practiced with soft smiles to sound like kindness. The finance head and the chief executive put together a narrative where growth trumped the messy ethics I kept pointing at. They called ethics resistance and flexibility vision. The words were slippery. They prepared media bullets that softened the edges. We were told I struggled to scale and resisted change. They set up internal messages that used euphemisms so when someone leaked a list of off-book payments, they could say it was misclassification. PR had rehearsed answers for questions about user safety, always starting with "We are taking this seriously." Their spin team even recorded a mock interview where they practiced saying, "We wish her well," like it was a benediction and not erasure. I didn't argue their narrative, I collected counter-evidence instead. I pulled clips showing me leading calm postmortems after outages, mentoring new hires at midnight, and writing the policies they now glossed over. I included emails where I pushed to keep privacy settings clear and consent screens honest. The contrast was obvious, their rehearsed sympathy versus the receipts of my steady work. I threaded those clips into the film, the plain ones that showed me in meetings, hands on a keyboard, not on a stage. At home, the strain kept arriving in rings like waves. Paige stopped trusting notifications. Every little ping made her pause, look at me, and flinch. Once, in the middle of the night, she sat up coughing and held her phone like a fragile thing. "Are you sure this will stop?" she asked. I wanted to give her a simple promise, and I couldn't, not yet. I told her what I knew, showed her logs with names blurred, and let her set the pace for how much she wanted public. She wanted to be heard but not defined by the harm. One night she woke from a dream and whispered about voices at her door, imagined or not, the fear was real. I made 3 cups of tea, burned the third a little by accident because my hands were shaking, and we sat on the couch looking at the screens. I learned how to sleep in short bursts, waking and checking messages like a lighthouse keeper. Paige slept on the couch most nights, and sometimes she'd stir and ask me to read a chapter out loud from a book she loved. I read to her with my eyes half on the monitors because it calmed us both. Those small domestic scenes kept me anchored to why I was doing this. It wasn't career revenge, it was stopping a system that could hurt people like my sister. Inside the team, doors closed in quieter, more painful ways. One engineer I'd mentored, funny, bright, someone who could take a bad night and make a joke, took a retention deal and went silent. He sent a short message. "I can't risk it." That message felt like a needle because I knew the numbers in his student loans and the pressure that came from being offered safety. Another security analyst whispered that internal mentions of my name were being flagged on monitoring tools, as if the company was trying to erase references to me in its own chat. The office manager who'd slipped me the party invite photo was called into a confidential interview and came out with a face that looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. I told the team to stop using work devices and to move correspondence to clean channels. I set up a backup ritual, 2 copies of everything, one in a personal cloud, one on encrypted storage. We asked people to volunteer for safety, no one was forced. 2 engineers who said they were worried were paused from contributing to the reveal, no shame, just protection. A few people requested names be omitted if anything went public, and I honored that immediately. The shrinking was painful, fewer hands, quieter notes, missing jokes in the chat. But the ones who stayed were focused and careful, and the loss sharpened our attention. Backups became rituals, zip, hash, checksum, small monotonous acts that felt sacred. We traced edits by hand and annotated who touched what. I learned the names of their kids and the songs they liked and why they stayed late. That human detail kept me from turning this into something cold. The narrowing of our group was a cost. It meant fewer shoulders to hold up the work, but it also meant fewer chances for someone to slip and be turned into a scapegoat. We moved like a small boat through rough water, slow, careful, and extremely aware that one wrong move could break something we couldn't fix. We tightened the plan. The lead developer found a new mirror route that didn't touch the folders Trent had been poking at. DevOps set up extra mirrors in places the company wouldn't think to look. Maggie and I rehearsed unlocking the film in stages. First the main feed replacement, then the link to the receipts, then a public inbox where anyone could upload more evidence anonymously. We added captions in 3 languages because the platform's reach wasn't just local, and we wanted clarity for people who get suspicious when something looks too polished. We ran a final dry run with volunteers and tweaked the timing. Feedback said the piece landed honest and human. It didn't sound like a teardown or a witch hunt. That mattered to me. The countdown kept lurching forward as if the platform itself wanted to hurry us along. Each time Trent poked at something to fix it, our timer found a new pulse and skipped again. I started sleeping in 90-minute bursts and learning to catch a few lines of the script while the kettle boiled. When the timer jumped, I felt a small, cold satisfaction, proof that they were losing their grip. The urgency made the team more focused. Jitters fell away and steady work took over. Check this file, double-check that timestamp, make sure no private names slipped into the visuals. The sense that we were running out of time sharpened my one guiding rule: daylight, not destruction. Everything we did had to make sense to a person in the kitchen with one hand on a mug. I started laying out the proof like a teacher preparing a lesson. The index file listed every item, each with a plain English note: who accessed what, when it happened, and why it mattered to a real person. Instead of industry terms, I wrote, "This is a list that was pulled from private spaces," or "This is an email asking staff to hide numbers so things look better." Each file had a checksum, a simple number showing it hadn't been changed after a time stamp. It was like signing each page with an invisible fingerprint. The QA lead insisted on visible hashes on screen captures so anyone could check for tampering. We added short captions under each slide explaining the point in one sentence. The goal was that a teenager, a bus driver, or a teacher could look at it and understand the harm. I made an explain like I'm 15 sheet. It had short entries about shell companies, about what a data export means in practice, and about how a private experiment can hurt someone. No legalese, no excuses, just plain words. I ran the sheet by page. If she squinted, we rewrote it until she nodded. The idea was to strip the mystery out of a story designed to hide things. We watermarked every file. This is not a hack, this is an audit. I recorded an audio version for people who prefer listening. Then we staged the public link to unlock at the same second the film replaced the feed. We tested it to the millisecond. Going public wasn't the first plan, it was the only plan left that couldn't be delayed into oblivion. I wrote a short public statement and deleted a draft of a private letter to the board. The private letter asked for a closed-door fix, an offer I then deleted. I realized those quiet roots were exactly how they hid things, so I made the choice to make it public. The statement was calm and plain. We told users we wouldn't sell their secrets. That promise was broken. I'm restoring it. No flourish, no name-calling. I wanted honesty to be louder than outrage. I scheduled that statement to go live at the exact second the film hit everyone's feed. I decided not to name lower-level staff or post anything that could endanger people without power. My fight was with the decision-makers and the system that let them act without oversight, not with the folks who followed orders. I showed the statement to Maggie and 3 engineers who'd stayed with me. They agreed. Then we set the staging so that the film and the statement would appear together like a matched pair: proof and promise. At 5 a.m., I sent the largest investor a compact package. It was short. 10 slides, 3 clips, and 1 clear ask: call an emergency vote to protect users and preserve trust. I didn't plead. I showed the risk. If the off-book deals and the experiment stayed hidden, the platform could hemorrhage users and value overnight. I showed them a path to stabilize things. Suspend the people involved, start a user privacy fund, and form an independent council where real users and engineers could weigh in before data decisions go live. I put numbers on the table for the fund and names for council roles, simple, specific asks, not vague promises. I sent the same package to 2 other big investors with time-stamped links so everyone would see the same thing at the same moment. I didn't copy the chief executive or the finance head, they would see it soon enough. My goal was to create simultaneity. If investors woke up to the same evidence, they couldn't rely on a sanitized internal memo later to claim ignorance. The investor's chief of staff replied within 20 minutes, "We're evaluating." That was faster than I expected and exactly what I needed. I included a draft resolution they could use for an emergency vote. Suspend the chief executive and the finance head pending investigation, restore my temporary voting rights for crisis decisions, and fund the privacy pool. I wasn't asking for power forever, just the ability to help stabilize things. I didn't want to battle for the top job. I wanted the company to stop hiding what it had done. The slides were visual and plain, not cunning. I didn't use industry terms. I called a shell company a company used to move money without showing who benefits. I called data exports lists of people's information taken from private groups. The simplicity made the risk clear. Sending those packages burned a bridge. Once investors knew, the secret was out of the room. There was no going back to the quiet plan, but it also meant the board couldn't pretend ignorance. If money moved or votes happened, the power to force change would arrive with it. I watched the inbox for a reply and felt the strange, anxious hope of someone waiting for a train that could carry everything forward. DevOps tested the mirror routes again, out loud like a chant. Mirror A, Mirror B, failover C. They'd put copies on content servers the company wouldn't think to touch, so even if someone tried to yank the film, a copy would still live elsewhere. We rehearsed the unlocking sequence to the millisecond: feed replacement, open receipts link, public inbox, each in order, each with a fallback plan. The lead developer insisted that the public inbox be anonymous first. People needed a place to drop evidence without fear. The QA lead pointed out that the simplest language wins: short sentences, clear labels, no corporate speak that lets people say, "We don't understand." We had a code phrase ready in case things went pear-shaped: short, ugly, decisive. Drop the umbrellas. If someone said it in the secure channel, we'd pull the ripcord and cancel the release. That never happened, but the existence of the phrase made the panic feel organized. I slipped a flash drive into my shoe and laughed at myself for the ridiculousness of it, then felt the laugh run away because of the weight of the thing. We ran through contingencies. What if there was a real outage? What if someone tried to take down mirrors? What if a court order came knocking? We had answers and paths for each, and a promise: no private scapegoating. If we named names, it would be about the decision makers and the system, not the people who were following orders. The last check was human. We all sat in a quiet for a minute, screens glow, painting faces, coffee cold, the apartment smelling faintly of jasmine. I looked at the team and said, "Why are we doing this?" Maggie answered without blinking, "For the users." Another voice echoed it, and then someone said, "For Paige." We closed the loop with those phrases like a prayer. Then three of us said it together almost at the same time: "For the users." The words felt like a small, hot thing in my chest. We logged off each other and set phones to do not disturb except for the team and family. The plan was locked. There was no turning back. That felt like staying true to what we'd promised. That night I cleaned my apartment the way my grandmother taught me: slow, methodical, as if tidying a space also tidied fear. I folded blankets, washed the mugs that had sat in a pile, and swept crumbs I found that made me think of small, avoidable things. I brewed a fresh pot of jasmine tea and changed the sticky note on my monitor from "Trust is a feature" to "Daylight over drama." The note looked almost theatrical under the lamp. Paige asked me if I was scared, and I told her the truth: "Yes, and I'm ready." She hugged me and said, "That helps." I set 3 alarms and wrote down the morning order on a card. T. Check mirrors, open the main feed, publish statement, walk to the office. I rehearsed the first lines I'd say when I walked back into the building after the reveal: short, calm, about users and protection. I laid out the list of conditions I would demand if the evidence landed as planned. Suspensions of the people tied to the off-book deals, a public apology, the $5 million privacy fund, an independent council of users and engineers, and formalization of Sentinel-7 with Maggie leading it. I wrote the language for an offer: 90 days of help to stabilize, then an advisory slot. I didn't want revenge, I wanted repair, and I wanted rules. I went through my phone and organized contacts, made sure the investor packet was exactly where it needed to be, and tucked Paige's favorite blanket into a chair so she could sleep without worrying about the couch. I slept in short, fitful stretches, an hour, 2 hours, dreaming of feeds flipping like cards. I woke at 5:45 a.m. to the kettle, muttered through a voice exercise, and read the opening line aloud 3 times until it sounded calm in my throat. The night smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and old coffee. Dawn came gray and patient. I felt a steady readiness settle in like armor that fits. At 9 o'clock a.m., the feed replaced itself. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world took a breath. Then the film started to play and people kept watching. The first minute showed nighttime footage of me at a desk, sleeves rolled, scribbling equations and drawing flow diagrams, small, honest scenes of building. The next minute cut to snippets of emails and spreadsheets, numbers shown with arrows and plain captions, money moved, lists taken. Then came voice clips and screen captures that traced the shell company, call it what it was without fancy words, and how data had been routed through it. Another part showed logs of privacy settings being opened for 2,000 test accounts, then closed, and how that action lined up with harassment targeted at small groups. We blurred names and handled sensitive items carefully, but the pattern read like a map. Halfway through, the film showed my sister's story, blurred faces, a calm narration she approved, screenshots of the kind of replies that wreck a night. We never sensationalized her pain. We showed cause and effect and then moved on. The penultimate minute spelled out the numbers: 11.2 million daily users, $18.4 million in off-book sales. The closing shot was a plain label, Sentinel-7, an engine that recorded these things. I said the last line quietly, not triumphant. This is not revenge, this is a repair. Then the receipts link opened under the film and the public inbox button popped into view. Comments started to pour in like rain: shock, anger, relief, people tagging friends. The mirrors held, the platform didn't crash. The staging work Maggie and DevOps did paid off. The film was everywhere at once. My inbox became a small war room within minutes. Reporters wrote short, clipped emails asking for interviews and for permission to use images. I replied with the investor packet and a line I'd prepared. Users are not product. An investigator messaged almost immediately, "We'd like to talk today." It was Dana Cross from the agency I didn't expect to see until later. That message felt like someone opening a door I hadn't known was locked. The emergency vote call from the largest investor pinged my phone. "Can you join in 3 hours?" The public inbox filled with documents, screenshots, stories, receipts, over 600 in the first hour alone. People were sending similar abuses they'd experienced. Patterns emerged fast. The investor's chief of staff called within 45 minutes and read the slides out loud while I watched the comments flood in. Former colleagues sent private messages from personal accounts. "We were too scared to say anything before." Page posted a short public line, "I'm okay, please be kind." The platform's help resources lit up as people sought support, and trust and safety started triaging reports. My tea left on the desk stayed hot for once because my hands needed it. The fear changed shape into work: who to call, what the board would do, and how to protect people who might be at risk of retaliation. Minutes felt elastic. I cleared my throat, clicked through the journalist emails, and typed a short reply offering to talk after I finished a statement. My phone buzzed with the incoming emergency vote invite. The surge of attention was both terrifying and relieving. It meant the problem couldn't be swept under the carpet anymore. It meant daylight was doing its job. I breathed, sipped the tea, and began to compose the careful, plain answers I knew we'd need. The chief executive and the finance head were there, faces flush with the kind of embarrassment that makes people sound clipped when they speak. Trent hung back, avoiding my eyes. Board members moved like they were balancing scales in their heads. I walked in slow, my steps felt measured, each one a line of code I'd written and double-checked. I didn't want to fill the room with a speech. I wanted to lay down facts and offer a path forward. The first words I said were short and steady. "I'm here to help fix what matters and protect users. Here are my conditions." The table was long and shiny, papers splayed like small flags. I slid a printed copy of the conditions across the table without drama. They were plain, not punitive, direct steps that would let the company start to repair the trust it had broken. Condition 1. Immediate suspension of the chief executive and the finance head while an independent review took place. Condition 2. A public apology to users that named the problem plainly, not with euphemisms. Condition 3. A $5 million fund to help users harmed by these actions, counseling, identity support, help with legal costs. Condition 4. The creation of an independent council made up of 12 people, 6 users from different walks of life and 6 engineers, to review and approve important data-related moves before they go live. Condition 5. Formalize Sentinel-7 as an ethics tool and place it under a team led by my lead developer, Maggie, with clear oversight and public reporting. I said I would help for 90 days to steady things and train successors, then step back to an advisory role. I added one more request: restore my voting rights temporarily for crisis decisions. I wasn't asking for permanent power. I wanted the ability to sign off on emergency moves so the platform could be safe while the board reorganized. I slid across a simple packet. Language the board could use for statements, a draft of the apology, and a page that explained how the council could pick members and how the fund would operate. Everything had a one-line explanation, no jargon, practical steps people could read in a coffee break. Silence settled like a low fog while they read. The chief executive sputtered at first, trying to sound outraged, calling my release a sabotage in a voice that felt like a reflex. The finance head tried to dismiss the fund as extravagant. Board members glanced at lawyers and then back at the packet. I kept my face calm. I didn't look to shame. I wanted them to choose repair, not cover-up. The largest investor, Martin Hale, stood and called for an emergency vote. I didn't expect the vote to go my way. I expected polite refusals and a long meeting full of lawyers and delays. I expected the kind of corporate motion that feels like a blanket thrown over a problem. Instead, the vote passed, narrow and sudden, like a hinge snapping into place. The room shifted. The chief executive and the finance head were suspended pending the review. My voting rights were restored for crisis decisions. Trent, the fixer, handed in his resignation within minutes, as if the room's new gravity made his position meaningless. My heart beat fast, but I didn't show it. It wasn't triumph that rose, it was relief mixed with an enormous responsibility. The board signed the apology text I had prepared almost without edits. They approved the $5 million fund. They agreed to the council and to formalize Sentinel-7 with Maggie at the helm. The papers were moved, signatures gathered. There was no cheering, no dramatic gloating, just the mechanical action of people doing the right thing because the mechanism to force them had been set in motion. Outside the glass walls, PR teams were already drafting the apology and prepping messaging. I asked for plain language, no sugarcoating. I wanted an apology that named the harm and said what would be done to repair it. The legal teams flinched but complied. The investor, Martin Hale, made a brief statement about restoring trust and then called for the fund to be filled immediately. People around the table exhaled and I felt my shoulders drop an inch. It was still fragile. A vote is a moment, not a cure. But it had broken the clean narrative they were building, the one where they erased me and staged a seamless transition. They tried a counterstroke almost immediately. The suspended leaders went public on social media and called the reveal an act of sabotage. Lawyers sent letters demanding the release of internal documents be stopped and claimed confidential information was exposed. I uploaded the legal letter to the public index with a short response: transparency preserved. The move to call our action sabotage looked thin in the light of the receipts. Pointing at a sprinkler's hose doesn't explain why a house burned. A firm threatened to file for injunctions, but the mirrors were already live and the film was everywhere. The company suffered a small outage after a hurried rollback of Trent's late-night changes. On the incident call, I kept my voice low and practical. We reverted to the last clean build and directed the team to freeze non-critical changes for 48 hours. The engineers who'd stayed inside asked for breathing room, and I gave it. A 48-hour moratorium that let them stabilize systems without more pokes from people who didn't understand the architecture. The apology went live and people said, "Finally." The platform's inbox filled with more evidence and more hurt stories. I answered nothing inflammatory on social media. I let the receipts speak. An investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dana Cross, emailed asking for an interview the next morning. Her message was short and formal. "We'd like to speak." I prepared timestamps and clean summaries for her and for the board. I drew a line early. We would not use lower-level staff as scapegoats to protect decision makers. People who followed orders would get support, not blame. That boundary matters. When a system fails, you fix the parts that failed and treat people humanely. I slept for 6 hours that night for the first time in days because the air felt a little less heavy. The worst of the immediate threat had been mitigated, but the fight wasn't over. Suspension and funding are beginnings, not endings. I set a schedule for the coming days. Meet the investigator, sit with the newly formed council to draft clear rules, and work with Maggie to formalize Sentinel-7 with public reporting. I held my sister's hand as she slept on the couch and felt the small, warm shape of resolve settle. The counterstroke had been expected. The important thing was how we answered it, calmly, with facts, and without throwing anyone under the bus. They raged about sabotage on social feeds and in interviews, but the receipts were public and clear. A law firm sent a letter to me advising I preserve confidentiality over certain materials. I uploaded the letter into the public index with a short note, "Preserving transparency." The small outage after a rushed rollback was ugly, but we managed it by reverting to the last clean build. I joined the incident call and stayed practical: direct instructions, a cooldown, and a plan for communicating to users what happened in plain language. Engineers inside the company asked for breathing room, and I gave them a 48-hour freeze on non-essential changes. The public apology posted with the plain words we'd insisted on, naming the harm, naming actions, committing funds and oversight. Users responded with relief and anger in equal measure, and trust and safety began triaging the incoming reports. I didn't gloat when the suspended leaders tried to paint me as a saboteur. I posted a single link to the receipts and said nothing else. That silence was deliberate. The point wasn't to win a public fight of words. It was to install a system that protected people. I set a boundary with the board. I wouldn't participate in smearing lower-level staff, and I wouldn't let the platform trade its users' privacy for short-term gains. In the quiet that followed, I felt the small comfort of a job that finally matched its morality. I slept 6 hours for the first time in days, phone on the nightstand, Paige on the couch, both of us breathing easier, and I woke ready for the hearings that would follow. A mid-level manager became the center of a rumor, and for a moment I saw how quickly blame spreads. Someone tried to pin the off-book pain on them, and the whisper ran through feeds. I corrected it publicly and said plainly, decisions were made above them, leave them alone. It mattered to me that we didn't let panic pick a scapegoat. Advertisers called asking if business would go on as usual. I told them the truth: business with ethics continues, and I handed them the new rules. It wasn't an apology to them, it was a line in the sand. My sister recorded a statement for the council. Her voice was steady when she spoke about the fear of being targeted and the small things that would have helped in the moment: faster reporting, better moderator response, a hotline number in the app. Hearing her put practical fixes into words made me feel like we were doing more than win a fight. We were learning how to be better. The engineers posted the first monthly transparency update in plain English. It listed approvals, denials, and simple reasons. No jargon, no attempts to soften the numbers. People read it and understood. That first update felt like a promise kept. I ran a workshop on trust by default for every team who touched user data. People asked real questions, not theater, and the conversations had weight. It was exhausting work, the kind that doesn't show up on a quarterly chart, but it felt like repair. The platform stabilized slowly. Users came back. Some accounts stayed gone, and we grieved that quietly trust lost is not always regained. But the worst churn faded, and the site lost the jitter it had been showing when Trent had been poking at things. We didn't fix everything in a week or a month, but every fix had a reason and a trail, and that built a new kind of confidence. Then a private offer landed in my inbox, slick wording, an amount that would change any life, and one line that took my breath. Sign this, pull the film down, and agree to a lifetime silence. They framed it as peace and moving forward. The price was tempting in the small, practical ways life can be tempting. No lawsuits, a clean exit, money that would pay back mortgages and student loans for people who'd stayed loyal. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could hear the hum of the apartment, Paige asleep on the couch, monitors dark. For a sliver of a second, I imagined how easy it would be to take that safety and walk away. I didn't sign. I forwarded the offer to the investigator and the board with one line. This is why we needed daylight. The move landed where it had to land. The board hesitated. Fear of lawsuits, fear of headlines, fear of anything that might make investors flinch rose like old ghosts in the room. I recorded a short video to users, "We will not go backward," and cued it to post if anyone tried to strongarm the council or the fund. Then I told the board this plainly. I would testify under oath on the record, and I wouldn't sign a gag. Choosing to put the truth in a public, legal record was a point of no return. It could cost me future roles, and it could keep doors closed. But it would also mean the facts couldn't be hidden again. When the suspended leaders stepped down, their departures felt like an end to a bad chapter rather than a victory lap. Interim leadership agreed to keep the council's veto on big data moves, and the $5 million privacy fund started issuing grants to people who needed help: therapy, identity protection, legal aid. The first thank you note came from someone who'd been harassed and couldn't afford counseling. Paige smiled when we read it together. It felt small and enormous at once. Maggie formalized Sentinel-7 as an ethics tool with a new team and clear oversight. She led it with the calm I've always admired. She built reporting that was public and plain so anyone could see what was happening. We published monthly trust reports, numbers, and short, honest sentences explaining them. No spin. No replacements for accountability. People started to read them because they trusted that they weren't marketing copy. After 90 days of hands-on work, stabilizing systems, setting up councils, testifying, meeting with investigators, I stepped back from daily operations. I moved into an advisory role focused on guardrails. The platform put the line we'd taped to my monitor on the privacy pages as a permanent footer. Trust is a feature. Seeing that sentence where people could read it every time they signed in made something in me unclench. One quiet morning months later, I sat in my apartment with jasmine tea steaming, Paige out buying groceries, monitors showing calm, not alerts. The floor no longer hummed with the neighbor's washer so much as it held steady underfoot. I felt tired and oddly light. We hadn't fixed everything. The world still had people who would look for shortcuts, but the rules had changed in a visible way. The countdown that had once set my life on fire had become a memory. I used to wake up early and get work done. If you've lived something like this, tell me in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more family revenge stories that show daylight works.